So today I'm going to talk about professions, and specifically what I would like Blizzard to do with them in Legion. We already know that they're going to be trying to make professions fun as a big part of their Legion plan, and the game's profession team is actually the largest yet, but of course we don't know what they are going to do, so here's the stuff that I would like to see out of this expansion. First up, more interactions between materials. So Warlord's profession simplification resulted in there being far fewer interactions between the various mats in the game. This meant less gameplay overall was driven from those materials, and it was all somewhat boiled down and made a bit more generic. Back in some of the past expansions, really, there was a very vibrant part of the economy with the interaction between many materials, and I think one of the best examples of that was the ore shuffle. Essentially, you would just prospect ore, and from there you'd be able to do a great many things with alchemy and jewel crafting, and the effect that that interaction had on almost all of the core crafting markets was really kind of massive, and it drove a lot of gameplay for crafters. It was one of my primary sources of enjoyment in both Cataclysm and Wrath, so its demise was very sad. That returning in Legion would be of massive interest to me, and the same goes for similar systems throughout the rest of the expansion that just mean the materials are a little bit more interesting. As much as adding a few new quests and recipes here and there is fun, I think it's stuff like this that makes the economy far more engaging and involved. Next up, I would like more unique items. It used to be that you would have some really unique crafted gear, especially with the older armor smithing and weaponsmithing systems. Having stuff like that would be really nice, as it would help to create some strong gameplay outside of the normal PvP and PvE stuff. Something that really only the dedicated crafters could really do that would be pretty powerful and definitely rare. I think that having this, at least for weapons, is a lot less likely in Legion though, because obviously we're going to have our artifact weapons, but maybe they could do it with some cool, unique items. I just like the idea of crafters having access to stuff that isn't the generic crafting version thingy weapon that suits a certain item level. I like the idea of there being big, unique items that people might actually remember because they're hard to craft, hard to get the recipe for, or are just particularly unique in their design. Of course, in Warlords, we ended up getting crafting slots for just about every slot that you have, and I think that actually made some of the crafting gear itself a little bit less cool and exciting. Next, I would like the idea of craftable cosmetic gear. Since cosmetic gear has no stats, nobody is forced to chase it down, which means they can make it properly hard to get, such that someone with a full set of that stuff would really be quite notable and would stand out. I think it would be pretty cool if, as a really good crafter, you could just unlock some gear to make for yourself that wouldn't have any stats, but at least would look really cool and would be a reward for your achievement. Essentially what I'm talking about here is Soulbound. It's basically the equivalent of Mythic Raid gear or Elite PvP gear, but for the crafting community. Next up, just some quality of life things. Some stuff like, say, milling and prospecting are just super tedious. Ideally, I would like it if you could just drag your materials to a profession window, and then you would have that profession window detect how many are in your bags and allow you to just hit, like, mill all, and automatically mill everything that you have. Assuming they don't do that, I recommend just like getting a nodding bird to hit your keybind for you, because yeah, some things like milling and prospecting they take a long time and they're kind of tedious. I believe they did mention at some point during Warlords that they wanted to polish this stuff up, so it stands to reason that Legion will actually see this upgrade. Next up, BOE, raid, and dungeon materials. We already know a bit about this, and we pretty much know it's going to be a thing, but I really like the idea of having materials from dungeons and raids that actually matters. That's actually quadruply so if they are bound unequipped. So from the perspective of being a crafter, if they're BOE, it means that other people are doing the farming for you, and the overall economy, I think, is a bit larger and more dynamic there, which means that people who really utilize every angle of it, I think, are going to succeed more, which is great. As a PvE player, though, it means you get a financial reward for doing your dungeons and your raids. Now, these materials would drop via personal loot, so there's no fighting. I just think overall it makes a whole lot of sense, so you can sell them on the AH to cover your bills. And if you're a PvPer, you don't need to give a single solitary fuck about this system. Certainly in comparison to, say, the Motes of Harmony from Mists of Pandaria, I vastly prefer something like this, where it's a BOE material, because it being BOE means that gameplay is driving the economy, which means that, of course, people have more reasons to play the game, for various different reasons, actually, which overall is a good thing for keeping people in the game. Next up, I would like bag space for materials. Now, this is totally borrowing from stuff that other MMOs do, but essentially this would be like having the reagent bank inside your regular bags. In World of Warcraft, the logistics of carrying items are not at all core to the economy, unlike, say, EVE Online, where moving your freight is basically the backbone of the economy. It's not like that in World of Warcraft. This means that bag space issues just boil down to being a pain in everyone's arse and not something that drives gameplay, so it's the sort of thing that should be solved, even in a way that might feel a bit overpowered. So what this would do is essentially give you a bag with a number of slots, in which all reagents would automatically go. Each one of these slots would either stack indefinitely, like in some MMOs, or just to a really large amount like WoW's reagent bank. I just think this would be a lovely quality of life change for crafters, and it would mean that if you're a crafter who wants to head out into the world and actually play other parts of the game, you're not doing it with this bag that needs to be managed and like dumped in a bank and all that stuff, because that's just not really too much fun. Bag space is an ongoing issue with WoW. Warlords didn't do a great job of fixing it, so hopefully something like this would go a ways to cleaning up that problem. Next, progression. So I like the idea of a crafter being able to progress in terms of more than just unlocked recipes. I reached out to people on Twitter about this video, and one suggestion was essentially the idea of having talent trees for the professions. A part of me likes this idea, actually. I think it's pretty cool if crafted or dedicated crafters could unlock more utility and perks that surround their profession. What would this stuff be? Well, I suppose maybe it would be unlocking the use of a forge that crafts items a bit faster, a VIP area with dedicated auctioneers and that's maybe got a closer mailbox to auction house distance. Perhaps it's just a network of additional auctioneers to use that are maybe at some more convenient locations. Basically, perks that tie into the game world that make a decent bit of sense and offer you a nice bit of convenience if you're a dedicated crafter. Fun unlocks to reward people's effort in terms of things that actually just affect their gameplay. I imagine Blizzard could also go wild with some of the more cosmetic elements here. Next up, salvaging, and this completely popped into my head when I was writing the last point of this video. Salvaging would be a profession that allows people to break stuff down into its base components. Obviously, there would be some sort of loss involved there. Unlike enchanting, though, this would give you, say, metal bars, cloth, leather, and the like. You would be able to salvage stuff around the world, so for an example, you could find a broken boat, a chest of salvage, a raided caravan, a mass grave of dead, and okay, maybe that's a little bit too dark, but you could find things in the world that you could maybe salvage to get some raw materials, or you could get bits of gear, drops that aren't wanted, things like that, and try to salvage them. Economically, I think this is interesting in terms of its balance between the amount of things that are created and then the amount of things that are recycled back into those raw materials, because when you disenchant something, it doesn't turn back into bars or leather or the things that really make that a bit of gear. Drops would be percentage based, with the chance of salvaging a very rare crafting component being, well, quite the rarity. I think overall this would require a lot more thought, but maybe it's an option for adding a new profession that doesn't involve adding a big all-encompassing set of gems or glyphs or something that really puts a lot of busy work onto players that don't want to partake in the profession. Next up, I've got the idea of a kind of profession guild/contract system. This is a little bit close to the contract system of EVE, actually, wherein you can essentially contract a player to do something for you. So when you think of being a crafter in a game, you think of somebody asking you to craft something, then, you know, them handing over the materials, you crafting it, and then getting some form of payment in return. What I would like is a system where people could go up to, say, a Crafter's Guild NPC, and then place an order for an item. They would deposit their materials and then set an amount of gold that they're willing to pay to get the item crafted. On the other side of the fence, the crafters would then talk to their Crafters Guild NPC and search for jobs. You can only accept a job if you've got the recipe unlocked, and when you accept a job, you don't actually get the materials in your bag. Instead, you just sort of get the ability to craft the item there and then on the spot. Obviously, you don't want to just hand the materials off to players, because a lot of people will just take the materials and run. When you craft an item, it just gets thrown back to the player who issued the contract, and then you, the crafter, get your gold reward. Overall, this is a way of basically doing that EVE Online style contract system, but without really griefing and scamming actually being particularly possible. Lots of people don't like the AH gameplay, so something like this is a more simple and direct way to get stuff done while still being a crafter. It also opens up options for the auction house players as well. Without having a profession, you could still purchase raw materials and then get them crafted into items through this system. You just have to pay a crafter. Now, the downside of this is that there would be less need to search for crafters in trade chat. Now, that doesn't seem to be something that really happens that much anymore, so I'm not sure if it's a massive loss, but I can see how it would be maybe not the best idea in some people's minds, because, you know, say the LFG tool meant you were finding less people to go for a dungeon. Well, maybe this would be the same thing to crafting. Still, I think people could still trade and craft manually outside of the system, so that option would still exist. Overall, though, I just think it's a bit of a cool idea that maybe could let people just say, hey, I'm going to go and craft for an hour. They can head to their Crafters Guild NPC and see what jobs are available and just get some simple money. Anyway, that's most of what I think about professions. As you can see, my main focus here is a lot more about making the economy interesting and reintroducing forms of depth. As much as having quests and dailies could be a good thing, I think economy-driven gameplay, like crafting, just depends on a really well set up system of supply and demand, with the raw materials just being widely useful with meaningful interactions such that there's competition between the various different professions for the base materials. Overall, I think something like this could work out very well, and regardless, I'm definitely excited to see what they're going to do in Legion, and certainly, with BlizzCon being on the horizon, I've got a feeling we're going to find out pretty soon. Anyway, that's it for me. If you want to talk about this video more, hit me up on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.